world. Power belonged to men. Kings commanded armies, emperors ruled continents, and nations were built with blood and steel. But then came a woman, a queen whose beauty became legend, whose voice captivated rulers, and whose name would survive for more than 2,000 years. Cleopatra. To some, she was a genius. To others, a seductress who manipulated the most powerful men alive. But the truth was far more dangerous, because Cleopatra was not fighting for love. She was fighting for a throne, for an empire on the edge of collapse, and for a kingdom surrounded by enemies. At the time, Rome was rising to dominate the world. Its armies conquered nations without mercy. Its leaders dreamed of absolute power, and Egypt, the richest land on earth, was slowly becoming prey. Then Cleopatra made a decision that would change history forever. She would get close to the men who controlled Rome itself. First, Julius Caesar, the conqueror. Then, Mark Antony, the warrior. Two of the most powerful men in human history. Both fell for Cleopatra, and through them, she nearly controlled the fate of the ancient world. But was it truly love? Or was Cleopatra using desire as a weapon to protect her crown and keep Egypt alive? This is the story of beauty, ambition, betrayal, and power. This is the story of Cleopatra, the queen who may have used love to rule the world. Before Cleopatra became a legend, Egypt was already dying. The age of the great pharaohs was over. The pyramids still stood proudly beneath the desert sun, but the power that once ruled the ancient world had begun to fade. For centuries, Egypt had been one of the richest kingdoms on earth. Its gold, its grain, and the mighty Nile made it the prize of the Mediterranean. But wealth attracts predators, and far to the north, a new power was rising: Rome. Rome was no longer just a republic. It was becoming a machine of conquest. Its armies crushed nations one after another, and every victory made it hungrier for more. Egypt was the perfect target: rich, divided, weak. Inside the royal palace, betrayal had become normal. Brothers fought sisters for the throne. Families poisoned each other for power. And in the middle of this chaos stood a young woman named Cleopatra. She was intelligent, ambitious, and unlike the rulers before her, she understood something terrifying. Egypt could no longer survive by force alone. To save her kingdom, she would need something more powerful than armies: influence, seduction, politics. And soon, the fate of Egypt itself would depend on her ability to control the most powerful men in Rome. In a world ruled by men, a woman appeared unlike anyone before her: Cleopatra. She was born inside a palace filled with conspiracies, where fear and betrayal were part of everyday life. In those times, the throne was not inherited peacefully. It was taken through deception, blood, and dangerous alliances. But Cleopatra was different from the beginning. She did not rely only on her beauty, as legends claim. She possessed a sharp mind and enormous ambition. She spoke several languages, understood politics, and knew how to earn the loyalty of those around her. While rulers lived in luxury and arrogance, she watched the world changing around her. She saw Rome growing stronger every day, while Egypt became weaker and weaker. And she realized something many in her time failed to understand. If she wanted to survive on the throne, she would have to play the most dangerous game in the world, the game of power. But the problem was, her enemies were not only outside the palace, they were inside her own family. As the struggle for the throne intensified, Cleopatra found herself hunted, isolated, and close to losing everything. Yet she was preparing for a bold move, a move that would change history forever, because she decided to confront the most powerful man in the world directly: Julius Caesar. By the time Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt, he was already becoming a living legend, a conqueror feared across the ancient world, a man whose armies had crushed entire nations. Wherever Caesar went, power followed. But Egypt was different. The kingdom was drowning in chaos. The royal family was at war with itself, and Cleopatra had already been pushed away from the throne. Alone, surrounded by enemies, she understood that this was her final chance. If Caesar supported her, she could regain the throne. If he refused, everything would be lost. So Cleopatra made one of the boldest decisions in history, according to legend. She secretly entered Caesar's palace hidden inside a carpet, and when the carpet was opened, standing before the most powerful man in Rome, was Cleopatra herself. Young, intelligent, fearless. Caesar was fascinated immediately, but this was more than attraction. Cleopatra knew exactly what she was doing. She spoke to Caesar not as a frightened queen, but as a ruler who understood politics as well as he did, and slowly, the alliance between them began to grow. Soon, Caesar helped Cleopatra return to power. Her enemies were defeated, and once again, she sat upon the throne of Egypt. But their relationship shocked Rome itself. Too many Romans. Cleopatra was dangerous, a foreign queen who had gained influence over Caesar. Some believed he was in love. Others believed Cleopatra was manipulating him for power. And while rumors spread across Rome, one thing became clear. Cleopatra was no longer just the queen of Egypt. She had become part of the battle for control of the Roman world itself. After the death of Julius Caesar, the Roman world exploded into chaos. Powerful men fought for control of Rome. Armies marched across nations, and the future of the empire hung on the edge of war. But while Rome was collapsing into violence, Cleopatra was waiting. She had already learned one important lesson. In a world ruled by power, survival depended on choosing the right ally. And soon, another man entered her life. Mark Antony, a legendary warrior, one of Rome's greatest generals, a man admired by soldiers and feared by enemies. But unlike Caesar, Antony was emotional, passionate, and hungry for glory. When Cleopatra and Antony finally met, history would never be the same again. Cleopatra arrived like a queen from mythology, surrounded by gold, music, perfumes, and luxury. She transformed their meeting into a spectacle Rome could never forget. Antony was captivated immediately. But once again, the question remained, was this true love? Or another political alliance disguised as romance? Together, Cleopatra and Antony became one of the most powerful couples in the ancient world. They dreamed of building an empire strong enough to challenge Rome itself. But in Rome, many saw Cleopatra as a threat. To her enemies, she was not just a queen anymore. She was a foreign woman influencing one of Rome's most powerful men, and soon, their love affair would lead to one of the greatest wars in ancient history. But every empire built on ambition eventually faces its fall. As Cleopatra and Mark Antony grew more powerful, their enemies in Rome grew more dangerous. Among them was a man who understood that defeating Antony alone would not be enough. Augustus? He knew Cleopatra was the true symbol of Antony's power, so Rome declared war, not only against Antony, but against Cleopatra herself. The final battle came near the waters of Actium. Ships burned, armies collapsed, and the dream of a new empire began to die. Antony's forces were defeated. Rome was closing in, and for the first time, Cleopatra could see the end approaching. Then came the moment that destroyed everything. Believing Cleopatra was dead, Antony took his own life. The great Roman warrior, broken by love, war, and defeat. But Cleopatra was still alive, alone inside her palace, surrounded by fear and silence. She faced one final choice: to live as a prisoner of Rome, or die as the Queen of Egypt. And so, according to legend, Cleopatra chose death. With her final breath, the age of ancient Egypt came to an end. Rome took control of Egypt. The kingdom of the Pharaohs disappeared forever. But even in death, Cleopatra achieved something few rulers ever could. She became immortal. For more than 2,000 years, the world has continued asking the same question. Was Cleopatra a woman driven by love, or a queen who used love as the ultimate weapon for power?